In the quiet reaches of Norway's fjords, Finland's snowfields, and Sweden's forested lakes, witnesses have reported encounters with luminous craft and humanoid figures that defy conventional explanation. These Nordic accounts, ranging from silent aerial visitations to alleged abductions, offer a haunting blend of folklore, isolation, and the uncanny. Join us for another account of close encounters in the Nordic countries. Part 4. Neva, Denmark, September 28, 1988, near Copenhagen. 5 years after it occurred, in December 1995, Sufoy, Scandinavian UFO Information, received an intriguing story from an old woman. According to the woman, she traveled alone to her Hornbeek home on this Monday night in September 1988 after attending a conference in Copenhagen. It was raining heavily and it was late at night. On her way home, she reached the seaside village of Neva at around 11:30 p.m. Rain was falling heavily as she drove down Gamle Strandvej, Old Beach Road, which led to the small, quiet town. The windshield wipers were running at full speed, and she had to slow down somewhat to see how she was driving. She suddenly noticed two slender, short creatures in the headlights of the automobile standing by a gutter grate that allowed water from the street to flow through. They were between 0.5 and 0.6 meters, 1.65 and 1.95 feet tall. They made hand gestures to one another, as though they were engaged in a vigorous conversation. Wearing a full-body costume, the tiny humanoids appear to be mummies, clothed from head to toe in a slick, olive green, plastic-like cloth that resembled bandages. This bandage even encompassed the mouth, nose, and eyes. They had long, pointed feet, slender arms that ended in a huge finger and thumb, and large, nearly egg-shaped heads that tapered slightly towards the chin. As she was operating the vehicle, the woman was startled and looked about. She wanted to view the little, odd creatures again since she couldn't believe what she was seeing. But she had already gone past and needed to go a little farther down the road to turn around. She could then reverse the automobile when Stations Veg crossed Gamle Strandvej. However, she experienced an unexplainable sense of unease when she considered driving back to the location where she had seen the creatures. Rather, she reversed the vehicle once more and proceeded home. Thus, regrettably, the woman was unable to verify what she had observed. However, if she had driven back, there's no guarantee that the creatures would have stayed. According to the woman, the entire episode took 2 to 3 minutes. Several oddities can be found in the report. The gutter grate, according to the woman, was between 50 and 100 meters, 55 and 110 yards, from where she turned, which should have been in the center of the village of Neva, see photo. So when she turned the car around, she should have seen the monsters again. However, she didn't bring this up in the report. Or did she not notice anything because it was too dark and pouring too much? Or, given that she claims the sequence of events took 2 to 3 minutes, was the observation point at the fields and meadows right before entering Neva? The 50 to 100 meter drive doesn't take long. Unless she lingered in the car for a long time before taking off again for home, could she have seen tiny toddlers wearing wet raincoats too? Since young children are unlikely to be playing at this time, particularly not alongside a road in the dark, this is less likely to occur. The fact that humanoids wearing anything resembling bandages have been seen before makes speculation regarding this phenomenon intriguing as well. Similar outfits were worn by the aliens in the fanged humanoids of Kofu in Japan and the Pascagoula abduction case in the United States. However, in the Neva instance, no UFO was seen, in contrast to these two sightings. Last but not least, the events that transpired in eastern Denmark this late evening in 1988 were an extremely intriguing observation, but regrettably, they are not without doubt. But according to Sufoy, the old woman was sincere and reliable, and she had seen something that she was unable to describe. Will we ever find out, though? Sundsvall, Sweden, March 1944. In March 1944, an anonymous man went cross-country skiing on Klissberg at Kliss Mountain, near Sundsvall, Sweden, early in the morning when few others were around. While skiing down, he spotted a metallic sphere on 4 legs, about 20 meters, 60 feet away. Intrigued, He approached it, but was suddenly pulled inside the ship through an elevator. Inside, he encountered three identical beings, each about 120 centimeters 4 feet. Tall and dressed in yellow jumpsuits with opaque helmets adorned with small horns. He noticed strange lights and technical equipment surrounding him. The beings communicated with him telepathically, assuring him that he was not in danger and that they only wanted to take samples from him. Despite his protests, they undressed him, attached wires to him, and conducted painful examinations, including a sharp instrument inserted into his groin. He struggled but found himself paralyzed and eventually lost consciousness. When he regained consciousness, he was returned to ground outside the ship, still in pain. The beings reassured him he wouldn't have scars and then silently ascended into the sky. In the days that followed, he experienced health problems, including dizziness and a high fever, which took weeks to resolve. Many years later, in 1984, while reading the newspaper, his TV turned on by itself, showing him skiing toward the same metallic sphere. He heard a voice in his head asking, "Do you recognize this?" and watched himself being examined by the yellow-clad beings. The voice urged him to join them, promising a longer life, but he firmly declined. The last thing he heard was a chilling, "We will be back." He had kept the 1944 incident secret from everyone except his family. But after the TV episode, he reached out to journalist Vera Norling at Hemmet's Journal. Unfortunately, during multiple calls, static interrupted their conversations, and she never heard from him again. A few days before the article was set to publish, they received a letter from him, which eventually appeared in the magazine weeks later. "I have written my statement in detail and placed it in a brown envelope labeled, 'Till be opened after my death,' which is stored in my bank deposit box. My living relatives will eventually discover my experiences. To protect my family from harassment, I must remain anonymous. While I don't expect anyone to believe my story, I insist it is true. Signed, still Mr. Anonymous. Mikkeli, Finland, December 1973. In December 1973, an 11-year-old boy in St. Michel Savalax had a terrifying abduction experience. While playing outside around 9:30 p.m., he heard a strange hissing noise. His dog became scared and was led inside by the boy's father. Soon after, the boy saw a gray object, about 5 meters in diameter, hover silently above their house. The craft had a corrugated metal look. As he felt frightened and tried to run inside, a warm beam of light from the craft immobilized him. Though unable to move, he could see and hear everything. He then saw 3 small humanoids, dressed in protective suits, jump onto the roof. They had large heads with big, black slanted eyes that reminded him of fetuses. After a brief moment on the roof, the beings returned to the craft, which descended closer to him. Metal arms emerged and grabbed him, lifting him inside. He vaguely remembered lying on a bunk and being examined by the beings before suddenly finding himself back in the yard, barefoot and disoriented. When he re-entered the house, an hour had passed, and the TV show his family had been watching was over. His attempt to tell his parents what happened was dismissed, and the next morning, his father found the rope and the boy's shoes on the roof. This unsettling experience led to years of PTSD for the boy, who eventually shared his story with UFO investigators in 2022. Harja, Western Sweden, August 25, 1958. Ivar Newman and his wife rented a small cabin for the summer from a local farmer named Oscar in Västergötland, Sweden. Around midnight, while Ivar was reading, he glanced out the window and saw a figure near the outhouse. Initially thinking it was Oscar, he soon realized the being was shorter than an adult, resembling an 11 or 12-year-old child. Its hooded head emitted a cold blue light, and it wore a matching jumpsuit. "I found its gaze to be hypnotic," Ivar recalled, feeling strangely unafraid. He hurried outside, but the being had already jumped a fence and was running away into a field about 100 meters, 300 feet from the cabin as Ivar chased after it. He spotted a strange, disc-shaped craft hovering in the field. It was around 12 meters, 36 feet in diameter. Ivar noticed a weird smell and suddenly felt extremely tired. He saw the being climb a ladder into craft, and then he heard a buzzing sound as the craft began to ascend. Ivar tried to move but found himself paralyzed. As the UFO flew away, he regained his mobility and walked back to the cabin, where he tried to tell his wife about the encounter, but she dismissed it as a nightmare. The next morning, Ivar returned to the landing site with Oscar, where they discovered 3 deep impressions in the soil, each about 30 centimeters, 12 inches deep. The vegetation was flattened in a circle matching the craft dimensions. Ivar reported the incident to investigators, adding to the many cases documented in the archive for the unexplained. Slagelse, southern Denmark, April 27, 1960. Around 3 a.m. on April 27, 1960, a man identified as A.N. was driving his 1953 Opel Record courier van along a country road between Slagelse and Ness when he experienced an unsettling feeling, as if he were being watched. Passing the estate of Gildenholm, he spotted a bright light in the sky to the southwest that quickly took the shape of a ring and approached at high speed. In just a few seconds, the glowing ring hovered 6 to 7 meters, 18 to 24 feet, from him, causing his car's engine light to illuminate, headlights to go out, and the engine to sputter. He pulled over to the right side of the road. The craft, approximately 9 by 6 meters, 27 by 18 feet, appeared bowl-shaped with glowing bands and hovered 3 meters 9 feet above the field. 3 telescoping legs extended from the craft, and a thick tube lowered to the ground, revealing a square opening. A.N. felt apathetic but remained in the car as 4 humanoids emerged, moving with the same graceful ease as divers. Dressed in shimmering green jumpsuits, they carried stick-like objects and examined the car, all while making no audible sounds except for a low hum. After a brief encounter, the humanoids returned to craft, which retracted its landing gear and ascended rapidly, disappearing from view. Once the craft left, the car's ignition light came back on and A.N. stepped outside, noticing a strange smell, possibly ozone. He felt the hot ground where the craft had landed. When he returned to his car, it started up without issue. A.N. estimated the entire encounter to have lasted about 4 minutes, as his wristwatch was now for minutes slow. A few years after the initial observation, A.N. returned to the site and found bare spots in the field where nothing had grown beneath where the craft had been. It took years for the vegetation to return, and since A.N. reported the event in 1966, UFO researchers have been unable to verify his claims. A.N., a house painter considered trustworthy by investigators, raises several questions. Why were the beings interested in his car? Why did they stop him on a lonely road in Denmark at night? What was the strange cable that approached his vehicle? This peculiar story shares common elements with other UFO cases, including a car stalling near a UFO, encounters with small humanoid beings, and the observer experiencing a sense of apathy. It also includes the Oz factor, where time seems to slow down and sound disappears, typical of close contact experiences. Raklev, Denmark, August 1956. This unusual report was published years later by Arnharder Jorgensen, who initially kept it to himself to protect his credibility in the military and postal service. The story unfolds when 10-year-old Arnharder was playing cowboys and Indians in Raklev. One evening, around 8 p.m., he hid in a pit he had dug in a hedge. While waiting, he heard strange voices that sounded like Japanese. Curious, he peeked out and saw 3 small, gray beings about 7 to 10 meters, 20 to 30 feet away. They were eating raspberries, laughing, and making loud noises like little boys. Armed with an air pistol, he attempted to approach them, but was hit by an awful smell of feces and chemicals. The beings stood around 120 centimeters, 4 feet, tall, with large heads, small mouths, and oversized shoes. When they noticed him, they dropped the raspberries. Although he felt an urge to flee, he was paralyzed as one being approached him, curiously examining him and his air pistol. When the being joined his companions in fleeing, Arnharder remained still until a spaceship suddenly appeared behind a nearby ridge and took off into the sky. After this, he rushed back to the other children, who were unaware of the incident. The next morning, he returned with 3 friends to the gravel pit, where they found holes they assumed were from the spacecraft's landing gear, along with a strange substance. They smashed the substance into holes and covered them with stones. The neighbor reported missing chickens in a flower stand, which they found in the pit, but the chickens were gone. A few days later, Arnharder's air pistol unexpectedly broke into pieces. While the story contains whimsical elements, such as the aliens laughing and eating berries, it raises questions about its authenticity. The other children who witnessed the traces were never found or interviewed. Arnharder waited until his retirement to share this odd experience, lending it some credibility due to his military background. Or does it? Ultimately, nothing is certain. On January 7, 1970, in Imjärvi, southern Finland, two friends, Arno Heinonen, 36, and Esko Viljo, 38, were cross-country skiing in the late afternoon. It was a cold, windless dusk at minus 17 degrees Celsius, 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit. While resting in a clearing, they heard a humming sound and saw a bright, pulsating light descending from the north. As it approached, they noticed it was a saucer-shaped ship about 3 meters 10 feet in diameter, hovering 3 to 4 meters 9 to 12 feet above them. A beam of light illuminated the snow, surrounded by a red-gray mist. Moments later, a small creature appeared in the light, standing about 1 meter 3 feet tall. It had a pale face, small eyes, and wore a pointed helmet, green jumpsuit, and long gloves. Holding a glowing device, it pointed at the men, creating a blinding light. Sparks flew around the mist, which thickened until they could no longer see each other or the creature. Suddenly, the light and mist disappeared, leaving the forest quiet. After a few minutes, Arno felt a strange stinging on his right side. When he tried to ski, he collapsed. Esko helped him home, a journey of 2 kilometers, 1.25 miles. That took an hour. Once home, Arno experienced back pain, a headache, difficulty breathing, and black urine. His symptoms persisted for months, along with fevers and balance issues, preventing him from working. Esko also faced health problems, including facial swelling and light sensitivity. Doctors suspected both men had been exposed to radioactive radiation. In June, an investigation team at the site reported headaches and other ailments. The incident remains a mystery, but it shares similarities with other UFO encounters where individuals exhibited symptoms of radiation exposure. The Man with Red Glowing Glasses in the Black Sphere, Norway, 1954. Norway is famous for its oil, skiing, and breathtaking natural landscapes, but has also been the site of numerous UFO sightings, including the well-known Hessdalen Lights. One such encounter occurred on November 23, 1954, in Torpo, Norwegian Highlands, involving 3 young girls, 10-year-old in Stordal, her 9-year-old sister Tora, and their friend Tormoy Hoagie. As the girls were walking home from school, they spotted a small black in the sky that rapidly grew larger. Initially thinking it was an aircraft, they soon realized it was a shiny black sphere. The object descended, hovered silently just 4 to 5 feet above them, and had a black bottom with yellow glass-like spots, small red lights, and sharp protrusions through its transparent upper part. They saw a figure inside, dressed in black and wearing gigantic red glasses. When the being turned to look at them, the girls were petrified. The sphere then ascended with a droning sound, colliding with power lines and causing sparks to fly. The terrified girls ran home, describing a strong odor that reminded them of fried sausages. When they reached home, their mother immediately recognized that something was wrong. After some time, they shared their story about the black sphere and the frightening being. Days later, local adults searched the area and found a 75-foot-long trail, as if something had been dragged along the ground. UFO investigator Ivar J. Larson was contacted, documenting a disturbed track about 25 yards long. He conducted interviews with the girls, who all told the same story, leading the village to believe them. The mystery remains. Did something extraordinary happen that day, or was it a fabrication? According to the girl's mother, she had never seen them so frightened before. On a November evening in 1988, several residents of Vitjo, a small community in southern Sweden, observed a metallic, cigar-shaped craft with colorful lights flying low over the treetops. This case was investigated by UFO Sweden. At about 9 p.m. on November 6, Susanna Lofson was breastfeeding her 3-month-old daughter while visiting her in-laws when she noticed a bright light outside. Initially thinking it was an airplane, she soon realized it was a strange craft. She called for her husband Michael and his father, Gunnar, to come and look. They stepped outside and saw a metallic, glowing cigar-shaped object, which made no noise before it silently disappeared behind the treetops. Later that evening, around 9:30 p.m., the Olofsons decided to drive home, but since their baby wouldn't sleep, they took a longer route. As they drove, they saw a strange cloud resembling a mushroom, which seemed to move across the treetops, despite the calm night. Finally, when they approached the Vitcho Golf Club, they saw a large object above the clubhouse illuminating the area. They estimated it to be about 75 to 100 meters long, 225 to 300 feet, with brightly colored lights and a graphite gray hull, but they saw no windows or creatures. Concerned for the children, they didn't approach any closer. After about 30 seconds, the craft ascended rapidly and vanished, leaving behind a luminous cloud that began to follow them. Feeling frightened, they returned to Michael's parents' house to report the sighting to the police. When Michael and his father arrived at his parents' house, they knocked on the door, but no one responded. Despite it being unusual for Michael's mother not to wake up easily, concerned, they went to a phone booth to call her, but when they returned, the phone suddenly died and the television wouldn't work either. At 11:30 p.m., they decided to search for a mysterious object they'd seen earlier, taking his father's video camera with them. About 3 kilometers, 1.85 miles from the golf course, they spotted a strange mushroom cloud. But Michael's father panicked and couldn't film it. They returned home without capturing it on video and found no traces of it the following day. Others in the area witnessed unusual phenomena that night as well. Pia Jonassen and her husband saw a huge, silent, oblong object with red and green lights around 8 p.m. Jan Shostren and Eric Bengtsson also spotted a large, dark object with colored lights while driving, thinking it was an airplane until they realized otherwise. Nicholas Willison, checking on horses nearby, described a large black object with lights. Anders Bengtsson, a neighbor, reported seeing a similar oblong light around 9 p.m. Investigations by UFO Sweden confirmed low cloud cover that night, but found no explanations for the sightings and could not trace any military operations. While it was speculated that it might be an unregistered blimp, Panorama, the only airship certified for night flying, was not in the area at the time. Despite thorough investigations, the unknown phenomena over Vitcho remain unexplained. Jyrinvaara, Northern Karelia, Finland, spring 1917. This abduction case was first mentioned in the newspaper Kirkkojoukalainen, read mainly by former residents of Korkejoki in Finnish-speaking Northern Karelia, now part of Russia. An article by Ladamin Aino, published on June 9, 1978, details a remarkable story from just before Finland's independence from Russia. Annie Latu, a middle-aged woman living alone about 6 kilometers, 3.7 miles, from the Korkejoki church, disappeared for several days. The villagers assumed she was visiting her daughter. However, upon her return, Annie recounted an incredible tale of how a large machine, resembling a metal wash basin, landed near her home. Small beings, which she called devils, descended by a ladder and forcibly took her aboard. Inside the craft, which was bright and silent, Annie claimed they traveled rapidly, showing her the wonders of the world and even stars. Although many villagers dismissed her account as a fever dream, Annie remained convinced of its truth, often sharing her experience. Years later, investigator Moritz Heidemaki interviewed one of Annie's neighbors, Mrs. NN, who recalled Annie frequently discussing the experience. Mrs. NN clarified that Annie was not a widow, as her husband Juho died years later. According to Mrs. NN, Annie encountered the machine while performing daily chores between January and Easter 1917. Despite the villagers labeling the beings as devils, Annie accepted this characterization only after fact. She spent several days aboard the craft, where she felt comfortable before being returned to her home. The villagers attributed her tale to a fever, but Annie never accepted this explanation, continuing to seek understanding of her extraordinary experience.